Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next session on the NASIG schedule on READ institutions. I am joined by a number of co-panelists. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you can indicate, maybe my co-panelists can indicate if they can see my screen, that would be great. We are going to, give me one second. We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and then do a quick 5 minutes or so on the perspective around READ institutions from our organizations, and then hope to open it up to a Q&A with the audience. So focusing on your questions and discussion rather than more talking at you. I'm really happy to be joined by my co-panelists, Jill from LYRASIS, Jason from SCELC, Courtney from Colgate, and Lev at Santa Clara. I'm Sarah Ruhi, I'm at PLOS. And with that, I will turn it over to Jill on general thoughts and the consortia take on READ institutions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope everyone can hear me. All these technologies, we're becoming more and more used to them, but something inevitably goes wrong. So let me know if you can't hear me. As Sarah indicated, I'm very pleased to be here today with my colleagues. My name is Jill Grogg, and I'm a strategist with the Content and Scholarly Communication Initiatives team at LYRASIS, which is a consortium mostly focused in the United States and Canada, but with some institutions around the world. We're primarily an academic consortium, but we do have galleries, archives, and museums as members as well. So that's who I am. And I'm going to kick us off today with some general thoughts about how consortia, oh, Sarah, I think I'm...
Oh, sorry. This is what happens when you're sharing your screen. How about that?
Okay.
There we go.
That's okay, no problem whatsoever. So I'm going to kick us off here with some general thoughts about consortia, and in specific how LYRASIS has begun to approach this dichotomy between read and publish institutions. So what we're working with here is the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous groups, and there's challenges and opportunities there. We talk about various stakeholder groups in the scholarly communication publishing system, such as libraries, publishers, authors, funders, and so forth. And it's really helpful to think about distinguishing libraries as research intensive, which would be what we're calling publish institutions, versus libraries at teaching focused, or what we would think of as read institutions. These are two separate stakeholder communities in the conversation about open access. And right now, all higher ed institutions fund the portions of the scholarly communication system that are meaningful and useful for their communities now. In other words, whether you're a publisher or a read institution, you're funneling money into the scholarly communication and publishing ecosystems. Some fund the salaries of researchers and authors to create scholarly works. Others fund publishers to help produce and distribute the content in ways that make it accessible to their communities. But the common thread here is that libraries of all types of institutions now support some part of the enterprise of getting this content to their users because that content is valuable to them. If one stakeholder group withdraws its funds, everyone ultimately is damaged in this. So the concept of shared funding across multiple stakeholder communities really needs to remain intact in order to fund the creation of content that supports research and education. And all stakeholders contribute because right now, again, they derive benefit, and that ultimate reality shouldn't change. An OA model shouldn't just assume that only those who publish will bear the cost of publication, because in reality, that's a divisive approach. So then we have the challenge of how do we find commonalities across these stakeholders for an open access landscape. Many of us are part of big deal groups with different consortia, overlapping consortia in the United States, and certainly at LYRASIS, our groups for our big deals with different publishers are very heterogeneous. So we have everybody from smaller community colleges or very teaching intensive institutions all the way up to ARLs who are high publish or research intensive. So we're struggling with how to reach transformative agreements or find commonalities across those while maintaining the approach of the group, because there is power in the group. That's why we all banded together to begin with, so that we could have more leverage. So just some general thoughts there. I don't want to take up too much time here about consortia. Jason is going to be providing some more specifics about some things they're doing at SCELC that I think are very interesting and useful as well. But before I turn off my microphone and turn it over to Jason, I did want to talk very briefly about something that we did this spring in January through March, right before COVID-19 hit the United States in a very real way. LYRASIS had created and released an open content survey, and it was not just about open access, but we broadened it out to think about open content in three main categories: open access scholarship, open data, and open educational resources. And that white paper with the analysis from the survey results should be available actually within the next couple of weeks. So you're getting the very first preview of the data and analysis that we found through that survey. And these are very top level results. The full survey results, again, will be in the white paper. One thing we found is that there are informal and formal policies in place at about 40 to 50% of the institutions who responded across our membership, but there's great variance in where these policies lie and how they are currently adhering to said policies. So that kind of scattershot approach can often create confusion within libraries about who's responsible for what, etc. And we talked some about that in the open content survey report. The other thing that isn't surprising, but it's great to have the data to really talk about it in a meaningful way, is that particularly in the United States, no uniform financial model has emerged for open access scholarship. Less than 40% of the respondents actually have an article processing charge or APC fund right now. Some of them did have them and they've disbanded it. So there's a wide variance in ways that people are implementing and funding open access at their institutions, as well as open data and open educational resources, which is outside the scope of what we're talking about here. And then finally, one thing that emerged very strongly across all three categories is that libraries are very comfortable advocating for open content, that there's a lot of energy right now in talking about open access scholarship with various communities on campus, less so with open data, but certainly more so with open educational resources. So please keep your eye out for that open content survey report, as I think it applies very directly to some of the things we're talking about today. It also really underlies the notion that none of us are in this alone. So if you feel like your institution is not very far along in either one of these three categories, or you're not quite sure whether you have formal or informal policies, what this open content survey report really exhibits is that I think we're all in the same boat at this point, just trying to figure out this new paradigm. So I think that's me, and I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
And just to comment, Jill, on that, I believe you guys are doing a webinar providing an update on this report. Is that correct?
We don't have one scheduled yet because we're still waiting for the graphic designers to get the report really nice. But yes, we will have a suite of webinars and other, we did an accessibility report last year and we presented at various conferences and then had various webinars. So yes, we don't have it scheduled yet.
To see that. That's great. Thank you, Jason.
All right, my name is Jason Price. I'm Director of Licensing Services at SCELC. We are a consortium of libraries serving small to mid-sized institutions. Our group is mostly a read institution and represents 1 to 2/3 of the traditional big deal spend by California institutions in these three major publishers' content. This is not a problem in and of itself, as SCELC represents the majority of the institutions, most of which are getting good value for their subscription dollars. Next. The issue is that these read institutions author very approximately only about 15 to 20% of the articles published by California authors in those publishers' journals. Next. So our institutions are currently paying 2 to 3 times more to read than they would pay in a fully transformed pay to publish world. Next. Can we expect the rest of California, and particularly the publish-focused institutions and their authors, to instantly fund this read to publish funding gap? Surely not, if they're to come anywhere close to their cost-neutral objectives. So this is certainly not a surprise. Yeah, there you go. This is certainly not a surprise to big deal publishers, but it was news to us. Read institutions have a lot of skin in the game. So significantly more open publishing from the pay to publish model poses a major threat to the huge portion of the big deal publisher revenue. So, no, still, same slide. So looming budget cuts notwithstanding, Read libraries and Read consortia have a choice. They can choose to go it alone, leveraging the decreasing value of their current Read subscriptions to lower their own costs as much as possible and as fast as possible, or they can partner with publish institutions and consortia to support the transition to the pay-to-publish model. I believe that there is a collaborative imperative. We need to work together to find a way to transition the current system to avoid disintermediation of libraries and consortia by working together. If we don't find a way, and instead allow or even cause the system to implode, our role as stewards will come to an end. We will cede our financial influence to individual authors who will not be able to negotiate as a group to control costs, nor seek to manage the system for the good of the many, as libraries have in the past. So next slide. What do our libraries want us to do? Well, this one half want us to prioritize immediate savings, and the other half wants us to prioritize statewide collaboration and coalitions. Rather than throw up our hands at this and give up, we are actually hoping to be able to do both. This data is from a much broader survey and study by Paige Mann that she did as part of her Open, Just, and Sustainable project. She took an action research approach focusing on SCELC libraries, but her results and recommendations strike me as broadly applicable to libraries and consortia struggling with these issues. So I highly recommend that you read them. Next. So what is SCELC doing? Within our community, we're facilitating ongoing discussions that surface disagreement, bringing scholarly communications and collections librarians together to share their perspectives, and libraries from across the spectrum of views, creating surveys meant to expose our differences, and pursuing unity in the midst of these differences and disagreements. Second, we are reconsidering and renegotiating many of our deals to avoid standard multi-year agreements, for flat renewals and in case-by-case cost reductions, to preserve current subscriptions in an effort to maintain a pathway to this transition. We're also angling for cost savings and open access support through collaborative renewals. Third, in a board-led and library-led effort, we're updating our mission, vision, and values and our strategic plan to reflect the shift toward collaboration and scholarly communication that is emerging within SCELC and necessary for the future. Next, beyond our usual community, we are actively working with other California consortia to map out complementary transformative renewals. Second, we're working with other read-leading consortia to develop solutions. And third, last but not least, we're evaluating unsub and unpaywall journals, which provides open access availability and publication data that libraries need in the context of their big deals. I'm happy to talk more about any of these actions during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. This is Sarah Ruhi. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at PLOS. I'm going to walk you very quickly through how PLOS is thinking about partnerships with libraries, particularly with so-called read institutions. So the question often comes up: why PLOS and libraries? And the answers are sort of the three buckets we find here. The first is on a sort of philosophical level, PLOS is very concerned that APCs may become the one-stop final business model around open access, particularly in light of the rush around Plan S. It works for some people. It's a model that is useful for some, but not for everyone. And we think it's important that as Plan S rolls out, there be a diversity of business models for OA and not just the author pays models. We're also very cognizant that native OA publishers could be at risk as a function of how this transition happens, depending on how transformative deals are negotiated. And if we want to partner with libraries, we need to be at the table as libraries are exploring these renegotiations, potential cancellations, or cost-neutral agreements through transformative agreements. And working with libraries, I think, just makes sense given the natural mission alignment around OA. And we have been overwhelmed by the feedback from libraries globally around the imperative to shift funds from subscription to open access, open science resources. So that's been really heartening. Within PLOS, we're really looking at these four major models as we evolve with our library partners. They sort of go from most traditional and exclusive to most transformative and inclusive as you kind of go up the stairs. Our collective action model is the really new thing that we're currently discussing with libraries globally, and I can get into more detail in the Q&A around this. But as you sort of go up the stairs, the possibilities for read institutions to engage in a meaningful way that brings benefit to their readers and authors increases. So that's an important component of how we're thinking about these models. In terms of what read means, I think it's an important question to discuss, and probably will come up more in the Q&A. Certainly, LYRASIS, SCELC, other consortia that I work with are very aware that they have 100% teaching institutions that don't do research themselves, but certainly are looking at research as they teach. You certainly also have institutions that are engaging in research but are primarily co-authoring. So when you look at the traditional business models around sort of subscription pricing, that tends to be based on lead or corresponding author affiliations. But co-authoring is an equally valuable contribution, and those institutions might be considered read. And then additionally, you have a whole set of institutions that have no current publishing history with a publisher like PLOS, for example, but always have the potential to publish, particularly as business models become more inclusive and the idea of author paying is no longer the sole way to participate in the ecosystem with a publisher like PLOS or other native OA publishers. So as we think through models, we're trying to evolve this definition of read, particularly with our collective action model, to throw the net wider in terms of institutions that can participate without necessarily getting away from the fact that every institution needs to deliver actual benefit to their patrons in one way or another. So anyway, there's much more to unpack here, but with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Lev.
Thank you, Sarah. So my name is Lev. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Collections and Scholarly Communication at Santa Clara University, which is a mid-sized Jesuit school located in Silicon Valley. We have a few graduate schools, but the College of Arts and Sciences is really the heart of the institution. We do produce research, but I think teaching is really the focus. Our faculty engage in great work, and our students often get to play a role in their research, but we are by no means an R1. And our size means that we just don't have the pull of a state system. So we often work through consortia. We're members of SCELC and also associations like the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities. We are committed to transforming the system of scholarly communication. We see it as an expression of Jesuit values, so increasing access to education and to social justice. I was actually brought into my current role specifically to increase engagement around open access. So how do we do that? In addition to funding and staffing an institutional repository, we direct 0.5% of our acquisitions budget to supporting transformative open access initiatives. That's not much, but we see it as a start. And so next slide, Sarah, thanks. So this has been easier in some areas than in others. There are a number of open access monograph initiatives around the country, and we've been fortunate to be able to support them. For example, we're members of Lever Press. For those who don't know, Lever Press is an open access press that charges no fees to authors. I think they call it platinum open access. It's funded and governed entirely by its member institutions. It's committed to the mission of liberal arts colleges, and it's built from the ground up to be a digital-first press. It's running on the University of Michigan's Fulcrum platform. And the initial roster of books really showcases the press's editorial themes, things like creative dialogue between traditional fields of inquiry, an emphasis on disciplinary innovation and transformation, engagement with issues of social and civic importance, and transcending the divisions between research and teaching. So in some ways, it's a press that's a bit more open to the mission of read institutions than publish institutions. Okay, so that's Lever. We also put some of this money towards supporting the UC Press's open access imprint called Luminos, and of course, Knowledge Unlatched. So frankly, it's not hard to find open access monograph projects to support. That hasn't really been our challenge. Models for serials are harder. Just this last year, we were invited to join 7 other institutions to sponsor a journal that wanted to flip to open access. In that case, it was a Jesuit Studies journal published by Brill, and we chose to chip in because it aligned well with our school's history and because we wanted to set a tone for our faculty to demonstrate that they could come to the library as a funding partner, and we would make these kinds of long-term commitments. We also joined Annual Review's Subscribe to Open campaign. We're really willing to put our money behind these kinds of library-sponsored open access projects, but the numbers are small. You flip one journal, or with Annual Reviews, I think the pilot was just 5 titles. What we haven't done so far is pour money into APC deposit accounts. We've been reluctant to use our OA money in this way, in large part because of concerns that article processing charges might entrench gaps in publishing between rich and poor countries. And what we found is that beyond APCs, there aren't very many models for funding open access journals. So I'm very curious to hear more about PLOS's new model. That's all from me. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Courtney.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Courtney Young, the University Librarian at Colgate University. I'm just going to speak very briefly because I know that we're all looking forward to having a conversation with you all about this topic and not just talking at you. So Colgate is a small liberal arts university, but in many ways, kind of with regards to particularly our faculty and those processes, we were very much reflect what you think of as very sort of traditional institutions. So despite the fact that we have, for the most part, you know, are educating undergraduate students with an education program that has less than 10 students in it, the focus, of course, is very much on teaching and opportunities for independent study and one-on-one research with students. But the expectations around tenure and promotion are as you would expect at, for example, an R1 institution. And then, of course, you have to have support for that type of research and scholarship. So this means in many ways that we tend to be a pretty heavy read institution. But there are some things that institutionally being supported. So for example, for faculty for APCs, through our Faculty Research Council, we're starting to have emerging conversations around digital scholarship through our Faculty Affairs Committee. We're fortunate to have a librarian who serves on that committee and can help to bring some perspective with regards to digital scholarship and also advance some things around the university's kind of landscape for open access and open data. But also thinking about this and thinking about the kinds of things that are kind of on the horizon. You know, we really want to start to think through this type of support we as the library can and should provide for our faculty and students. One of those pieces is related to an institutional repository and what potential it has to support what our faculty and undergraduates who are producing some really great research and scholarship can do, but also thinking about how we can use partnerships similar to the ones that you've already heard about to allow us to advance our work in this area and contribute more fully. In addition to Colgate being part of the Oberlin group of libraries within the state of New York, we're also a part of the New York Six, which includes 5 other liberal arts institutions that are here in the upstate of New York. And so thinking about what is the possibility for us to build a consortium together that helps to support that work. Another piece is related to how our peer institutions, similar institutions, could sort of work together and kind of explore things through something such as the MIT framework for publisher contracts, and how that consortial model would look for us and allow us to reorganize, really focus on things in our institutions that will make a lot of sense to add to this conversation. The important piece around all of these things for me, as I'm having these conversations and thinking through these things, is really related to how do we really build those partnerships when you don't have a LYRASIS in place doing that, or a SCELC maybe in place doing that, and sort of really emphasizing that we can have a role to really help support reducing barriers for faculty to getting their research into places where they want to get it in, and to adopt things with an open framework and really be supportive of the work that they're trying to do. So I think I'm going to leave it at that in terms of my time, and look forward to participating with my colleagues in Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. We are going to go ahead and hopefully share our videos. I'm not sure if we can yet. Nope, I guess we can't. But with that, we can drop into the Q&A, and as well as the questions that we have kind of thought through. Sorry, I'm just trying to jump. Here we go. So I am not sure if I can see the Q&A yet. No. I'm sure the hosts are sorting that out.
I can jump in and read the questions for you if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So the first one is, Sarah, can you share more about the collective action funding models that you referred to earlier?
Sure. Let me do that last, because it could just take a bit of time.
Okay.
I'd rather let my library colleagues speak to some of what they're doing before kind of getting into that. But I will absolutely do it before we sign off.
All right, and I will go on to the next question. At Santa Clara University, have you considered some of the cost-neutral read and publish deals on offer from independent society publishers, such as Company of Biologists, IWA Publishing, Microbiology Society, and Portland Press? Or are the subject areas in which they publish not relevant to your faculty and students?
It's a great question. One of the we haven't specifically looked at those yet, but one of the areas I do really want to move into is supporting learned societies and associations. So I've actually been talking with Jason and SCELC about how we can move more in that direction. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and certainly for our faculty, I think it would be relevant.
This is Jill. LYRASIS is the North American Administrative Agent and Outreach Ally for Knowledge Unlatched, and unless I'm forgetting acronyms, I think IWA, is that the something Water Association Publishing? If it is, I think they're now working with Knowledge Unlatched as well. So just another way to do kind of crowdfunding with that type of open access model.
Great. Looks like, Lev, what was the Brill 5-year project? They did not catch that.
Yeah, I'll pull up the title. I don't have it in memory right now. I'll pull it up and share it in the chat.
Okay. And then, so Santa Clara, do you publicize your 0.5% collections budget investment in OA? And have you developed criteria for evaluating potential investments in OA platforms?
We definitely talk a lot about it on campus. It's not something I don't think we've really started to put out sort of a marketing footprint beyond the campus. So we report on how we spend that money every year at our State of the Library presentation to administration and faculty. But beyond that, we haven't started. In terms of evaluating, no, it's early days. It's only been a couple of years that we've been doing this. So I think assessment is a huge commitment and value for us. So it's an important area that we need to start looking at. We're in the middle of a lot of, we started these 5-year commitments with a few different projects probably 2 years ago.
Great. The next is, can anyone talk a little more about equity and how to balance support for academics at historically underprivileged and underfunded institutions?
I'm happy to jump in on that. Most publishers have some sort of waiver program when you're talking about business models that require authors to manage the payment method. One of the reasons PLOS wants to have more options than just APCs as a model is, that process takes time. Some people can feel like it's asking for a handout. It's a way of highlighting difference that's not ideal. Our current waiver program either takes into account the country where you're receiving funding from, or just making a case personally that you don't have the funds. We then try to either waive the fee or some percentage of the fee. And we spend a fair amount of money a year doing that. Other publishers, it's my understanding, this is a pretty standard practice. And certainly if your authors aren't aware of those opportunities, we can share more information about that. So authors know, but ideally we get to a point where more libraries are engaging in agreements with publishers like PLOS, so that component just goes away for their authors. That said, if you're an underfunded institution, we should talk about that as well.
I think it also highlights the importance of really needing to make sure that that's sort of built into what these publishers and what these institutions are doing. And right now we're very much in a moment where I think people expect and demand there to be that type of equity and opportunity for access. It doesn't just affect the institution, it also affects those who are able to get access to it as well, in a very diverse way. I mean, I think about right now, we were supposed to all be in Spokane right now having this, but COVID-19, we're all sort of here with you virtually, which is fantastic. But I really feel that like within this moment, it really adds a lens. And I think we're adding more lenses as sort of this spring and summer go on, that really kind of change the way that we look at consider all of these things. So for example, I mentioned sort of that MIT framework for publisher contracts. There potentially could be something that really is built in that speaks to that component with regards to diversity and inclusion as well.
A number of our Scout libraries have expressed concern about APC-driven models, and I think I agree with them and have kind of internalized that somewhat, and that's part of what makes me think that to the extent there has to be, or there will be, some level of APC-driven future to the business model of OA, it's important for libraries to maintain their influence, because if we go to just individual market-driven, then we don't have influence over things, and issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion are not things that we can try to support with those funds. So, as much as to some degree that is more about, it does maintain the status quo a little bit more to keep big deals going and invest in them that way. I haven't heard really good arguments that say we'll be better off if it's just all one individual driven. I think libraries need to stay in this, and to do that, and in order to support addressing those issues well, and that's part of what we want to try to do and have been asked to do as we negotiate our transformative agreements with major publishers.
I would just echo that, and something Jason and I had talked about is really providing a space when we have these conversations about how to include all the different stakeholders, read and publish, that there's room here for disagreement, a respectful disagreement, but to open up that conversation that we're not going to all agree on how to do this, but to do it together is going to be much more impactful and powerful than to go it alone. So I think understanding that this is a difficult conversation. I certainly don't. LYRASIS certainly doesn't have all the answers. I'd hazard a guess that SCELC doesn't have all the answers yet either. But just beginning to have these conversations, but doing it together is really critical.
One of the questions that Jennifer is raising is, if we try to make the case for APC funding with the dollars saved via big deal cancellations, admins may be tempted to sweep lines rather than refocus them. And Jennifer, I'm not super clear on that last part, so if you wouldn't mind typing in a clarification, I would like to riff on that with the speakers while you issue that clarification. Is there discussion amongst your institutions, whether within your own institution or consortia, about committing to repurposing saved funds to OA-driven efforts? Lev, you mentioned that it is. Is there a more concerted effort around this, or is it too soon to sort of make those kinds of commitments or assertions at this point?
I think it may be a little early. Jason could probably say a bit more about some of the negotiations and discussions we've been having through the consortium, but it's definitely something we're interested in. You know, when I look at this fraction of a % that we're spending on OA, and then, you know, for us, millions of dollars we're spending on all these big deals, it just seems like we ought to be able to pivot some of that money. And it almost feels like a failure of imagination to say, look, if we stop doing it the way we're doing it now, everything's going to fall apart and publishers, we're not going to be able to fund scholarly communication. That doesn't seem likely. We need to be able to imagine a different kind of future here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we would hope to do both. We would hope to, you know, reduce costs and see those savings invested in you know, open access support that institutions can support, even though they are going to act selfishly to some extent, our institution, and as well taking some of the money that is the money that continues to be invested in big deals and make sure that they are actually supporting real open access, progress in open access. One example that we've been thinking about, I've been talking about a lot, but you know, it's hard to make happen, although some of the deals are doing this, is to make sure that publisher big deals are populating our institutional repositories. There are ways to automate that process. It can be part of the big deal, and then potentially provide value that is there and of value for institutions that aren't focused on publishing, but still need to get value from those funds. So I think it's both ways, but it's tough to make a commitment to do this because libraries have to do it, and then they have to do it in the broader context of their institutions. And so it's a long haul effort, but I hope that we are successful.
Well, and Jennifer, we've unmuted you, and I think your clarification is going to speak right to Jason's point. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was specifically speaking about, you know, a more than 10-year habit or practice that we've had to institute because no budget dollars, you know, being increased for us. And so our practice of reallocation, you know, we feel like it's a win when we can offer something new, but we also don't have the means yet, or scope or manpower, to really show how open access is impacting our usage in a large way. R5 is helping some with that, but as Lev was saying, we don't have long-term data for showing, you know, some type of meaningful analysis. And while we've been in fairly good financial position at my institution, we're now facing, you know, like everybody else, double-digit budget cuts. So to make the case for something like an APC fund or something like that now is not going to resonate with an administration that is potentially panicked.
That's, I'm sure everyone on the panel and certainly in attendance has had this conversation. I have the privilege of talking to many librarians a week, and the levels of panic differ, but you know, the concerns that you articulated are exactly the same. I wanted to riff on a couple things, Jennifer, that you brought up. So the first was kind of the quest for metrics, which I think is really interesting. PLOS is going to begin undertaking a kind of research project to understand how libraries will evaluate open access agreements, whatever they are, moving forward. Because the reality is, you know, while R5 starts to address open access usage, the reality is the majority of those counter reports are not really relevant for an institutional repository or a native OA publisher. So we're actually involved at the executive committee level to start providing feedback to counter around what makes sense. Because at the end of the day, if you're measuring the efficacy of an OA agreement by looking at how many times a user in your IP range has accessed content, that's maybe 20% of the usage from your institution, because people don't need to be within your IP range to get access, right? So there's a question of what metrics make sense, and is it, you know, do things like, I think you could make the case usage is no longer the appropriate metric. If so, what is? And so that's a research effort we're going to be undertaking in the near term, and part of that right now is a partnership with JISC, where we're doing surveys with their members around these kinds of particular questions. I'm really glad that you flagged that. Thanks. Did anyone want to jump on that?
One thing we're doing is we're working with JISC as well with the IRIS, and forgive me, I forget what that it's Institutional Repository Usage Statistics, maybe. And we're working with them to make that available in the United States as a way to gather those types of metrics for institutional repositories, or the green OA. So I think Sarah's exactly right. We need to rethink usage as the end-all be-all metric, but not throw it out completely, but just to reevaluate and reimagine how we interpret that particular metric.
Well, particularly because, you know, the landscape cannot be all one thing or another.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be a healthy mix of these things, because it's we know OA is not free. So, you know, we have to recognize and acknowledge that some research to be presented costs a lot of money to present it. So, you know, this sounds cynical, but if we push too hard on the open access, again, I risk an administration saying, well, you don't need as much money then, do you?
Well, I think there's an important balance there in terms of messaging to an institution. And since we only have a couple of minutes left, if my co-panelists will allow, I was going to quickly explain the collective action model, because Jennifer, you're providing a beautiful segue for that. So I think it's a really interesting point. Like, regardless of whether you're talking to someone like PLOS or Frontiers or Hindawi, or you're talking to a commercial publisher or a subscription publisher, the question remains of what are you paying for, right? And historically, the paradigm has been you're paying to read. As you move into this published paradigm, whatever it's called, and I think we can debate if that's the right name for it, libraries could play a really important part in supporting the costs to publish. And this is very much what PLOS was trying to do with these flat fee models, is in exchange for a flat fee that's paid annually, authors from your institution have no friction with respect to managing the payment mechanism. They slide through as if they were participating in the subscription paradigm they have now, and the library has a, you know, defined spend that goes every year to covering that cost. So it's not a donation, and it's not paying for content that's already open. With respect to the collective action model, what we're trying to achieve with this, it's important to remember it's only for 2 journals, so PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine. Lev, I promise I have options for you on the other 5 too, if you want to talk about that. Those 2 journals are highly selective. And as most of you know, highly selective journals tend to have very high APCs. PLOS has subsidized those 2 journals' APCs to keep them at $3,000 a pop, which is not cheap, but as compared to the $5,000, $6,000 APCs that are out there, we've done our best with that. Now, the argument in a lot of editorial spaces is that, hey, you want to have highly selective journals? The only way to do it open access is high APCs. And we just fundamentally disagree with that. And so the effort around this pilot is to say, can we fund highly selective OA journals without charging authors high APCs? And if we shift that cost to institutions, how do we do it in an equitable way that matches the benefit they get from publishing with the cost that they're paying? So what we've done, super quickly, identified the cost that we need to cover for both of those journals, identify a small amount for reinvestment in those journals, cap it, and then spread that cost across as many institutions as possible in an equitable way. And the way we've chosen to do that, we're only using one determinant to figure out what tier you're in this model, and it's how often your institution has published in either PLOS Medicine or PLOS Biology in the last 5.75 years, so 2014 through Q3 of 2019. And how often you published as a corresponding author versus as a contributing author. So this is the first model that takes the contributing author value, assigns a number to it, and then uses that to select a tier. So you will have very intense, high research intensive institutions in a very low tier in this model because they have no they have a very low publishing history. You will have other institutions you wouldn't expect to see on a higher end paying more because they publish more. Now, the goal of this is over time, we transition most likely 3 to 4 years to shifting this cost to the libraries. And then APCs then go up for these journals. And the goal isn't to get more money out of the authors. The goal is to use this as a way to say, look, your APC is now $4,000 instead of $3,000. But hey, if your library participates, their annual fee for you to pay is $2,000. So let's go talk to your library and see if we can find a way to partner such that you don't have to pay. So it's a kind of a combination of benefits and penalties so we can get the collective action component of this to work. Because the bottom line is, if not enough institutions participate, we can't make that flip. And we might have to see the argument that, yeah, high APCs are the only way. But I'm not convinced that that's the case. And I think given the feedback we've received around this model from consortia globally, the enthusiasm is there. It's the budget adjustments that we're dealing with now. But I'm happy to say that the lowest price tier for PLOS medicine is $250 annually. So it's a very, very wide range. It goes from as high as $28,000 to a massive research institution to $250 for a tiny one. So that's a very quick view, but please email me if you want a little bit more there, and I'll be quiet.
I mean, ultimately, it's another way to spread the cost of the collective action. That's the goal of this. How do we spread the cost as widely as possible? It's the same issue, read versus publish in the big deals, and that shifting model there. It is about how we support the ecosystem broadly, and to make it work, we need that, and we need every different way we can come up with to try to make it happen and to move in that direction. So I think that's great. It's hard for me to think about it within Scout because I think of, you know, the huge percentage of our institutions that have never published in PLOS biology or medicine, and probably won't. Do they have a role to play, or do they not? That's another question that came up. Is, you know, what's the difference if it's an organization that just publishes a little versus doesn't publish at all? What are the benefits and how do we make that work? But we need to think hard about it if we believe that it's important for us to maintain our role as stewards, and I just really think it is. I hope that many of the rest of you listening agree.
And just to jump off of that, Jason, the way we are treating institutions with no prior publishing history in those two journals is they all just come in at the lower tiers. It doesn't matter if you are USC or you're a Santa Clara. You come in at the lowest tier, and when we do the big reevaluation at the end of the 3-year period, we re-tier everyone and rejigger the cost. And of course, if we have more institutions participate, then the cost we need, the money then goes back to all the institutions at renewal in terms of lower fees. So, you know, a lot of small institutions are treating participation in this model as insurance on the off chance that if their authors publish as co-authors in the coming years, they won't be exposed to a fee, because we anticipate there might be a time where we have to consider charging contributing authors. But right now we don't anticipate that. We'll see how the rollout goes, and more to come on that as well. And Elizabeth, I'm happy to answer you offline with respect to the questions around why APCs are higher for selective journals. I can give you a whole thing on that. Charla's got a really nice point. We as a library community need to start looking beyond counting usage of content to ascertain value and focus on return on the investment in the infrastructure that supports the publication and access of content. Charla, thank you for articulating that. Hear, hear. Adam Chesler's asking, this sounds like the tiered ACM model. Would you say the two are similar? I would say absolutely not, Adam. I'm happy to go into more depth there as well.
To Charlotte's point, and maybe to Jennifer's earlier comment, you know, I think like all of us, we're expecting deep budget cuts in the next few months, maybe in the next week. We're waiting to find out. But when those cuts come, you know, we have all kinds of tools for assessment that we're going to start to work with. I can't help thinking that those 5 journals that we've signed on with annual reviews, regardless of the usage that we see there, they're not going to be first on the chopping block, because we're aware that money we're paying into that is not just benefiting us, but benefiting the whole ecosystem. Those aren't the first ones for it to cut. Yeah. And so we haven't talked about yet this idea of like the free rider problem, but I think when we talk about moving beyond usage, there's a lot of other forces that are acting on us when we make these very kind of social or political decisions about what are we going to cut and not cut.
And of course, from an institutional perspective, we're often talking about how collaboration is important. So this is a different way to sort of think about, is collaboration as an institution important, participating in this and helping to sort of spread the wealth so that we can all get access.
And I just realized that our slide that I made doesn't have our emails addresses on it. So maybe the panelists can go ahead and just pop our emails in the chat. So folks want to get in touch with us to dive deeper, we can put that to everyone. And Naysig, are we at time? Or?
Yep, you're just at time.
Awesome.
Oh.
Well, big thanks on behalf of the panel and to everyone who attended. 400 something still on the call. Amazing. Really appreciate the opportunity and everyone joining today.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you for the fantastic presentation and everyone attending, as well as our sponsors for helping make the online conference freely available. And then just kind of as some housekeeping, the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And the speakers will be monitoring the NASIG forum through June 2020 for additional questions. The NASIG Code of Conduct will apply to all discussions on this forum. If you're tweeting about this session, please use the hashtag NASIG 2020 and then join us again at 1:15 on the East Coast. It's 1:15. So that goes to wherever you are for our next session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.